Hello, and welcome to Sonata She Wrote. Today I'll be discussing the 8th song in Schubert's cycle Winterreise, Rückblick, or backward glance. There's really no perfect translation for this word in English. What the traveler is doing in this song is looking backward in time. It's a retrospective, or in 21st century terms, a clip show episode. Lauri Suurpää, in her book Death in Winterreise, places this song in her second group, called The Continuation of the Journey and the Outpouring of Misery. She writes, "The speaker again makes clear associations with things connected to his beloved, specifically the town where she lives. The poem would seem to contradict the chronology of events, but this contradiction is justified by the song's title, Backward Glance. Moreover, Rückblick has a clear function in this second group. The poem's final stanza shows that the option of turning back is still in the narrator's mind, at least implicitly. His love and the vain hope of regaining it linger on. Thus, the song takes place outside of the narrative in the sense that it is retrospective. The traveler remembers the pain of fleeing the town where his beloved lives, and the, even farther in the past, joyous experience of being in his beloved's company."
Es brennt mir unter beiden Sohlen, tritt ich auch schon auf Eis und Schnee. Ich möcht nicht wieder Atem holen, bis ich nicht mehr die Türme seh. Hab mich an jedem Stein gestoßen, so eilt ich zu der Stadt hinaus. Die Krähen warfen Bell und schlossen auf meinen Hut von jedem Haus. Die Krähen warfen Bell und schlossen auf meinen Hut von jedem Haus.
Again, the image of ice and fire is present in the text. Though treading over ice and snow, the wanderer's feet are burning. Susan Youens writes that the psychological hardships of his leave-taking are evoked as physical difficulties, as an exaggerated interpretation of a commonplace natural phenomenon. The birds roosting on the pointed eaves of houses shift position and move about, dislodging pieces of ice and snowballs. The wanderer, acutely conscious of his alienation from society, sees hostile intentions where none exist. An experience we probably can all relate to. You get your belt loop or your bag strap stuck on a doorknob, and suddenly the doorknob isn't an inanimate object, but a vicious, conscious being that's obviously out to get you. So are the stones that, in his memory, trip the traveler as he flees the town, and the crows which, shuffling on the roof, dislodge ice that falls on him. Tom Beghin, the pianist, uses another of his instrument's many pedals for the first time in this song. This one, called the bassoon stop, but you sometimes see it labeled as a Turk or Turkish stop as well. Essentially, the stop lowers a strip of parchment to barely touch the strings, and the effect is a jangly sound, originally intended to call to mind the sound of percussion in an Ottoman janissary corps. The period was really rife with Orientalism, and the Ottoman Empire had been at war with Austria as recently as 1791. Beghin is using the sound here to mimic the harsh sound of crows rattling and chuckling.
Wie anders hast du mich empfangen, du Stadt der Unbeständigkeit. An deinen blanken Fenstern sangen die Lerch und Nachtigall im Streit. Die runden Lindenbäume blühten, die klaren Rinnen rauschten hell. Und ach, zwei Mädchenaugen glühten, da war's geschehen und ich gesehen. Und ach, zwei Mädchenaugen glühten, da war's geschehen und ich gesehen.
These verses, in the parallel G major, recall the positive, ebullient feelings of being in the maiden's presence. But even here, there's darkness. When discussing the maiden's eyes locking with his own, Schubert tonicizes E minor. He even removes himself one step farther by discussing his past self in the third person. Then, friend, it was over. as in over for himself and his happiness. In the final verses, the wanderer considers venturing back to her house. Notice that he doesn't speak of seeing her again, only standing before the home, a desire which, we can infer from the wording, he does not act on.
Kommt mir der Tag in die Gedanken, möcht ich noch einmal rückwärts sehen, möcht ich zurück wieder wanken, vor ihrem Hause stille stehen. Kommt mir der Tag in die Gedanken, möcht ich noch einmal rückwärts sehen, möcht ich zurück wieder wanken, vor ihrem Hause stille stehen, möcht ich zurück wieder wanken, vor ihrem Hause stille stehen, vor ihrem Hause stille stehen.
The song ends, in relation to the rest of the cycle, in a unique way. It barely has any postlude at all, and what it does have is non-cadential. Motion from 4 to 1, evoking the idea of prayer and religion. Susan Youens closes this section of her book by writing, "When the wanderer, for the last time, repeats Vor ihrem Hause stille stehen, his triplet eighth figures drag against the continued 16th notes in the accompaniment in an apt rhythmic representation of slowed motion. The singer at the end stands still on a sustained G in the lower register, but before the piano accompaniment does likewise, there is a final flurry of 16th note agitation on plagal cadential harmonies whose traditional connotations of prayer or plea no one could mistake." I hope you enjoyed this analysis of Rückblick. The next song, number 9, is Irrlicht, or Will o' the Wisp. As always, thank you to my patrons, who you can see on the screen now. If you'd like to join my Patreon for any amount, you'll have access to about an hour and 45-minute analysis of Mahler's First Symphony. You can do so at patreon.com/sonata she wrote. As always, thank you for joining me.